Yeah, so we'll just do a little demo in Alan's garden. Try not to set fire to anything. No, it'll be fine. I might go bother your pond for a second. And you'll just see a quick, hopefully, you know, very short 30-second flight demo.
Including me.
It's crazy, huh? So imagine that for a couple of minutes and like you can go from 0 to 60 in about 2 seconds.
I need to buy that suit right now. I would be dead by tea time. Literally be dead by tea time.
Luckily, you can learn on the safety tether, and then just like riding a bike, as hard as it seems to, you know, you imagine, just like riding a bike, your brain just clicks in, and there's a moment where everybody who learns this just looks up and grins, and they just get it. You think about a kid learning to ride a bike. How do they don't read a book. They don't get really told. They just, when they relax enough, like flying a helicopter really. Yeah. They just relax and go, oh my God, I've got it. And sometimes it takes people literally minutes.
Are you always a bit relieved when you land and you're still alive?
The risk, the safety thing is entirely proportional to how high you are. Yeah. So yeah, look, you know, I usually wear a helmet. I'm really not very high. I'm over grass. I agree, getting a failure just over that wall would be really annoying.
Yeah. Would be for me, it's a new wall.
yeah, me too. But no, I mean, I've done some pretty difficult and unusual flights, like we were flying to, you know, Bears Island over a mile over water when it was gusting 20-30 mile an hour winds and driving rain. You know, that gets your mind focused, but it's a bit like a military kind of exercise.
Yeah, so what's the maximum wind then you can fly this in? I guess it depends if it's a headwind or
if I'm flying like this, so I've got no leg wing. You might have seen the sort of wingsuit wing. Yeah. When it's quite still or you've got a tailwind, that works really well. If it's quite gusty and buffety, because that increases your sort of aerodynamic surface area, then it makes it quite a handful to fly. Like this, I get bothered as much by the wind as you would standing there in the same wind. You can feel a little bit, but it's so easy to vector around it. You saw how precise you can be. So no, the wind doesn't really bother you too much at all.
That was awesome. Thank
you.
Huh?
No problem at all.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Pull the Pin. It's business, brand, and banter, and today we are pulling the pin on gravity. Now, four of my favourite things in life, in this order probably, are training, aviation, entrepreneurialism, and military shit. So basically, I think today's guest might be my all-time best friend, top guest, because it's only the founder of Gravity Industries. He's the real live Iron Man. It's Richard Browning.
Thanks, Alan. Quite an intro.
Yeah, it was quite. I made it up on the spot. So, Richard, we've just seen something awesome with you. So we've just been treated to a private demonstration of your jetpack. I mean, do you call it a jetpack? Is it?
Well, strictly speaking, name for it, haven't you? Jet suit, I guess, jet is suit. A slight difference in that this is more about wearing a sort of augmentation to the human being rather than strapping to a traditional jetpack. Okay. So, yeah, jet suit.
It was pretty awesome all the same. And we're still alive.
Yes.
Most importantly, I'm
nothing
still alive.
Was set fire to.
Nothing's been, my moorhens aren't very happy, but other than that.
Got less hens now, I think.
The gardener's not happy, but yeah, we're still alive, which is the main thing. So tell us about Gravity. I mean, how long has it taken to get this off the ground, literally? What gave you the idea? Have you always been interested in flying? I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the kind of positive history. So, I mean, if I wind the clock back, I was actually an oil trader with BP, the oil company, for about 16 years. My whole family history, my whole family background was from the world of aviation, though. So my late father was an aeronautical engineer, maverick inventor and designer, and I kind of grew up building and making things with him.
And what did he design? Like engines or aircraft?
He was an aeronautical engineer, so yes, he worked for various different aviation companies. I think he worked. He worked for actually a missile development company at one point, I remember, and then worked for Westland Helicopters.
Your dad made missiles.
Well, I didn't think I was even around when he did that. I think
Mine repaired lorries.
He worked in the aviation kind of department of that, I think, but it was then in Westland Helicopters. But then he actually kind of sort of struck out by himself to really pioneer a whole load of new innovations in the bicycle industry. So I've still got stuck in my garage one of the best folding bikes I've ever seen still, and it was one of his inventions. But it's actually mountain bike suspension that he chose to focus on. And if everybody remembers, there was a day quite some decades ago where or a time when you didn't actually have suspension on mountain bikes. They were just solid bicycles and you just rattled around across the countryside.
I think I had one.
Yeah.
I had a chopper, I had an orange chopper
there
in the
you
1970s.
go. Right, taking that off-road, you'd know about it. And he pioneered the whole idea of a mountain bike suspension in the headset, a bit like the steering wheel or nose wheel on an aircraft. So anyway, he struck out on his own to kind of build and pioneer this industry. So that was a deeply inspiring story. I'll circle back to that because it didn't have a great ending, but it was a very informative one. But his father was a wartime aviator and civil pilot, and then my grandfather on my mother's side used to be chief executive and chairman of that very same helicopter company, Westlands.
Okay.
And I think that...
And they made the links, didn't they, I think?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. I mean, again, I think when I was about 1 year old, I was ferried around in a helicopter, but other than that, I had no kind of meaningful kind of connection with it. But
I'm an aviation geek, sorry. Still the fastest helicopter ever built.
Quite a machine. So there was a big family heritage there, but I'd struck off to go and build this career in the oil industry. I spent about 6 years in the Royal Marines Reserve alongside that as well, to scratch this sort of long-held desire to go and test people. Myself. No, not exactly. No, to go and sort of test.
Frowned upon now, shooting people.
I always aspired to join the military. I wanted to sort of test myself in that arena, and I've got a huge respect for that community. And I thought, what better way of doing that? Still trying to maintain the day job. Of trying to get my green lid, while I was doing that. So anyway, about 4 or 5 years ago, as the latest in a long succession of I suppose, in a way, self-challenge kind of opportunities, whether it's setting up your own business or whether it's trying to learn to run ultramarathons or the calisthenics stuff I got into, I started to hatch this idea, somewhat subconsciously inspired by that family background and the military training. Could you try and get a human being to fly in a way that was entirely raw and nimble and authentic and leveraging the human brain and body as much as possible? So I don't want a stick, I don't want a yoke, I don't want a steering wheel, I don't want a seat, I don't want any computers that are going to fly this. I literally want to add the missing component, which is horsepower, to my brain and body and see if I can fly in that way. No logical reason, no business idea behind it whatsoever.
Be honest, was this before you saw the film Iron Man in 2008?
Do you know, I genuinely, I must have seen the film, but it was not in the forefront of my mind. I did not genuinely see the film and then think, gosh, I've got to go and build an Iron Man suit.
I did. You got a bit further than I did with it.
But as the evolution in 2016 started to kind of come together, it became obvious that actually all credit to the Marvel folks who kind of, hypothesized the idea and recreated it in CGI. Mm-hmm. Actually, I started to head sort of blindly in the same kind of direction. And actually, months after we launched the company in 2017, we had this great meeting of minds where some of the Marvel team in LA who had actually done the CGI behind the character, those famous scenes where Tony Stark is trying to learn in the garage and like balancing around, and there's that moment where he straightens up and feels the kind of the coordination and is able to coherently fly it. They had hypothesized what this would all be like. And now the clients we train almost go through the same process. Mm-hmm. They don't go thrashing around, smashing into the Lamborghinis in the park garage, unfortunately.
Yeah, please don't do that.
But actually, we had this great meeting where they were like, oh my God, this is actually what we guessed it would be like. And I mean, amazing credit to them to imagine that being like the process. But anyway, so yeah, I played with the idea in 2016 over about 8 months. Kind of put this together, realized that I could just about get enough power on the human body. I put an engine on the back of each leg eventually, 2 on each arm, and then in around October, November time, 2016, managed to fly for the first time. And
did you get burnt a lot?
No, not at all. No, weirdly, I mean, it's the obvious assumption, but actually, luckily, air has a very low specific heat capacity. So whilst the air is very hot immediately as it exits the engine, it loses power very quickly. So a bit like a hairdryer. If you kind of hold a hairdryer a long way away from you, it's not actually very hot. It goes up exponentially in temperature as it gets closer to your...
So if I were to strap, say, I'm thinking probably 6 Dysons hairdryers to me, Would that work?
It's funny that despite those things feeling like they're quite powerful, they are just metaphorically pissing in the wind in comparison
fair
to
enough.
Well, you've just witnessed.
I thought I'd done it very cheaply then.
That little decking area I just took off from your house there, you probably felt that kind of rumbling. You could feel a rumbling in your soul when the 1,000 horsepower kicks in.
Is that what it's 1,000 horsepower?
Yeah, it's quite an approximation to equate thrust with horsepower, and it gets very nerdy very quickly. But yes, as crudely as you can do it, that's 1,050 horsepower that just took off from your.
It makes sense
decking.
in terms of just the noise and the velocity, and
It's
I'm
nuts.
amazed the control you've got in such a confined area. I'm just amazed.
It is. Yeah, if I may take a moment to sort of reflect on it. Yes, I mean you are blowing literally air. This stuff we are breathing in and out violently enough to be able to propel, my 75, 80 kilos and all that equipment upwards, and then use the human balance part of your brain to vector control that. In other words, flaring your arms in and out just precisely enough in a subconscious way to create enough stability. As I mentioned to you just after I did the demo, my wife has fed me biscuits while I've been hovering in midair, just for fun. You can see all this on our social media. You can see how precise you are able to fly just by using that kind of brain balance skill we all have.
So I'm digressing now because I'm still fascinated in the story, because I can talk to you about aviation, entrepreneurialism and business and the military and all sorts. So I'm like a kid in a sweet shop. But is it better as well closer to the ground? You need the ground effect. I know you obviously don't want to fall too far, but it's the same if you go up higher.
So this is something we commonly get people asking. So ground effect, if you bring a helicopter in or an aircraft in close to the ground, you get a sort of cushion of pressure that you can ride depending on what's going on. Because this is hosing almost like a fire hose of air out of each engine, realistically, unless I wore some sort of Mary Poppins kind of skirt to contain some of that.
We can make that happen.
I've never tried it. We've nearly flown with an umbrella before, which would look quite funny. But unless I had that, you can't experience any ground effect. So actually, ironically, you get the opposite of it.
I was going to say, it's actually disrupting
the recirculation of your own warm air, which is something that helicopters can experience as they come into a sort of bin laden type compound. That actually crashed one of the helicopters in that exercise. We get the same kind of thing. You have to factor that in. As the warm air goes back into the engines, you lose a bit of thrust.
It's creating turbulence
as well. So actually, it's easier if you go a bit higher. But you can't unfortunately get any ground effect.
Okay, so it's 2016 now, so you've built this. What did your wife and kids say? Were they supportive? Did they need much
So yes,
convincing?
I mean, my wife knew what she was getting into, I guess, when she married me back from not long after university. It was the latest in a long succession of unusual ideas. This was probably out there in terms of being pretty unusual, but I think the best way to describe it is that actually when my mother-in-law came to this little hidden away farm in Wiltshire that we were using as a test site, a little kind of dirty farmyard, and she'd been wondering what we were doing. And my wife and kids have obviously been coming up and helping me out with some of the trials we've been doing.
And the neighbours, I imagine, as well, wondered what was going on.
Well, that was why it was a pretty remote farmyard, because as you've heard the noise now, you wouldn't want to do that regularly around people. My mother-in-law came along, didn't really know what to expect. I took off, flew around a little bit like you saw today, land, shut down, and she just, without saying anything, just walked up and just gave me a hug, just got it. Just suddenly in an unspoken kind of way.
She's seen you do that and she's thought, ka-ching.
Yeah.
Definitely thought, finally.
So it was, I think it was a nice demonstration of the power this has to kind of really kind of move people in a way. And it does, like you said, it sort of appeals to that sort of, I suppose, innate human desire to be able to fly. You look up at the birds and you think, wouldn't that be cool? And we don't have the power to do that.
My most frequent recurring dream, I would say, since childhood was just being able to fly, but not fly a plane, not powered flight, but fly like you've just flown and just fly. So
it's sometimes, for instance, like walking along and then running and then that step, and then the next step is not on the ground and you're going. You literally can do that with this system. It is the closest I've ever felt with anything to being able to do that. And you are not consciously aware or thinking of how you're doing it. You're just going where your mind wants to go.
The reason it's a common dream, apparently, is because it's what people associate with success in terms of flight, because it's kind of
breaking free of the bound,
proportionate to the air becoming free and actually sort of doing something under your own power, so to speak. So
we've only scraped the surface from the psychology of this. But anyway, if my mother-in-law had that kind of reaction to it, I thought, oh my goodness, okay, now we've done this, and I didn't have any reason for doing it. I just thought it'd be fun. I thought, well, should we wrap this up in some form of brand and serve it up properly, launch it properly, and see what the world makes of it? Yeah. Genuinely, I was still an oil trader running a trading book. So we formed this company, Gravity. The Gravity was an idea of one of my original co-founders, and I thought it was a great idea, great name. And we launched it in around April 2017. So spent the winter really just refining it and working out really how we could position this. We patented it as well. I mean, I didn't realize at the time that you had to patent it before you show the world, because obviously once you've shown people, you can't patent it. So that was a bit of luck.
And you have to patent something physical, because you can't patent an idea, because somebody would have patented this in the 50s.
It gets
otherwise
increasingly expensive and difficult, yes. So we patented it. The only prior art, as the phrase goes, that was cited by the patent attorney was the Marvel creation of Iron Man, who they did list on the patent kind of sort of feedback and then threw it out. So I knew some folks at Red Bull, and I knew some folks at Wired, and I thought between those two brands at the time, they represented this kind of spirit, a bit like you guys, right? In terms of going beyond and, I suppose an amalgam of technology and human spirit and all that kind of stuff. And so they did some launch videos for us, and we pulled the pin, I should say, on this around April Fool's Day. That just became a bit of an accident. It hit 1 billion impressions within about 3 days. I think because people thought, gosh, look, these guys have done a whole... Yeah, look at the effort they've weirdly gone to doing this as a joke. And then I think we got a revisit by everybody, because they went, oh my God, it's not going away. I think that's real. And so it got reshared by everybody.
See, what's fascinated me is, because I'm into military stuff and aviation, whatever as well, and I like kind of programs about this type of stuff. And what you've done in your farm in Wiltshire in... admittedly, how many years start to finish?
Well, it was 8 months development, which was pretty quick. And then that we really launched in April 2017. So it's been just over 3.5 years or so.
So basically between 8 months and 3 years, the US military has been trying to do since like late 1940s, early 50s.
There is there is an element of that, but then I spent 16 years in a big corporate, and I'm very familiar with how bless big corporates, they're all the same. Yeah, they do a lot of things really well, but nimble out of the box.
Agility is not one of them.
That's the sacrifice of being a big efficient corporate machine. They're not good at suddenly pivoting. So when it comes to the aviation world, they're not thinking about stuff that I was told that this would not be possible in the early days. I didn't really explain to people why I was asking the question, but I heard a wonderful story that after I don't know how true this is, but with your quite military audience, there might be a few people who smile at this. There was apparently a whiteboarded exercise done in the US military after the first Iron Man film came out, where they went, look, this is a cool film, right? It would be quite cool if we could do this stuff, right? And I know it's all make-believe, but science fiction does inform a lot of creativity. The idea of flipping open a little bit of plastic in your hand and speaking to the spaceship up above the the new planet I've discovered, that would be quite cool. And that later basically became the iPhone, or the mobile phone. So there was a whiteboard exercise, and they listed out all the capability of this Iron Man character and said, there's all these things. There's like situational awareness, there's AI, there's night vision, there's body armor, and it later, to an extent, so I believe anyway, from the various conversations and meetings I've had around the place, became somewhat the Talos program. Mm-hmm. The one capability that they struck off the board and everybody laughed at and said would never happen was the flight piece. And I met the senior folks who were in the room when that was whiteboarded out, as in they literally struck it off and went, we're never going to look at that because it can't be done.
You see, this doesn't surprise me, because you can imagine so many incredibly intelligent people getting involved who are potentially sort of too clever for their own good, throwing a few $1 trillion at it or whatever the number was, and then again, making it so broad, again, making it stealthy. You can just imagine all the things you'd have to do. And what it really needed was one person that really wanted to see it work.
I think
just put the time and effort into doing it.
In a weird way, I think from my childhood, from being not afraid to take things apart, make things, having that sort of aviation aeronautical heritage around me. I'm pretty sure at age 10 I could describe to you how a swash plate worked in a helicopter, just because my dad used to rattle on about it the whole time, and my granddad used to run the business making them. And I love visual engineering. I love visualizing how a mechanism works. And I think I knew enough to not know that it wasn't supposed to be possible, if that phrase hangs together. So in other words, I knew enough to be dangerous in a positive way. I knew enough to know to not be scared of getting hold of a gas turbine and safely playing with it, and not being hung up by the idea that the 120,000 RPM spindle would probably have a gyroscopic moment which would make this impossible to manipulate. I think, I don't think it will. I reckon that the mass is probably not going to be that far away from the axis, so I reckon it'll be okay. Mm-hmm. I don't subscribe to the idea that I have to have counter-rotating spindles on the pair of arm engines. I was told all this afterwards. Yeah. I even did a lecture. I won't say which university it was, but it was an MIT level university, where a fairly senior professor stood up halfway through my talk and said, that's no way should be possible. I've spent my career looking at electric hammer drills where you let go of the trigger and you get that torque kick. Yep. There's no way this should work. You should not be able to manipulate those engines, you're going to have some kind of actuated exoskeleton to fight it. And you just saw what I did. It was effortless.
You are incredibly strong as well.
Thank you very much. I love that narrative early on. I've had to drop it now. It was very flattering. I just smile and nod.
He's ridiculously powerful. He's being very humble.
Yes, very much so. No, but we've trained so many people to do this. There's a whole bunch of my team fly. Yes, there's a couple that are, gymnasts, but actually, my CAD designer flies, my aeronautical engineering team fly. It is very effortless when you know how to do it.
We'll come on to the training angle in a minute, actually, because I'm really interested in the training element of it as well. But do you mind me asking, is your dad still around? This is you achieve this.
Yeah. So this is this is a common theme. I'm probably people sitting with you talking about achieving interesting things. It seems to be a common, slightly unfortunate theme that those people often do it off the back of some kind of hard-learnt lesson. So yeah, when I was 15, he unfortunately took his own life because that journey that he was going on of striking out on by himself and trying to, somewhat disrupt then the bicycle industry or the mountain bike industry. It was a pretty unforgiving environment back in those days.
It's incredibly lonely as well.
Yeah.
And if you look at the likes of Steve Jobs and people who just see things differently, and all these amazing people who are just clearly on the spectrum, they just see things differently to everyone else, and that, just seeing things differently just kind of makes you a bit of an outcast because
you have to be, otherwise you'd agree with the status quo.
Nothing would ever change. Exactly.
You're actually, whether consciously or not, saying to the community that you're trying to disrupt, I think you're wrong and I know better. You've done the same thing, right?
Everyone's told us things can't be done, and
every time somebody says something can't be done, you know as well as I do, there's an opportunity on there.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, those people who say it can't be done, 9.5 times out of 10, they're bloody right.
I know.
But every now and then they're not, and that's where the opportunity is. But back when he was kind of forging his own pathway here, it was a much less forgiving environment, and actually there wasn't the same startup narrative. Now it's cool to run startups. It has been for about 10, 15 years or so. Back then, why are you giving up a perfectly good day job and pension and whatever?
Yeah.
So
it was because you're unemployable, basically. It was like.
Well, you're a lunatic in a shed somewhere trying to, just build some Heath Robinson waste of time. And he'd completely squared away the engineering, but he'd missed, and this is the lesson I inherited, which is that same thing with you, inventing the product is sadly about 5 or 10% of the problem. The rest of it is marketing, positioning. It's
convincing others.
Oh yeah, and I think as the focused technician of the engineering idea, you just think, well, everybody else should see that, but no, you've got to find a way of communicating that to people. So I was very, very wary that inventing something that, oh my God, you can just strap on and within 2 minutes just take off and fly around. I think that's cool. I've got to have the humility to believe that other people might not find it cool. They might be completely lost as to what the point of it is. What is this for? What am I seeing? And I knew I had to work hard, and this is why we, worked hard on the brand when we launched it, just to see what the world would make of it. And by doing 100 events in 30 countries in 3 years. That has been a deliberate, actually very luckily paid for exercise in just polling the world to go, what do you think? Do you like this? Do you want to see more? What is it you like about this? And I mean,
I've got to say, it's honestly one of the coolest things I have ever seen, and I am never speechless. And you came back in, and for the first time ever, and everyone knows this doesn't happen, I didn't know what to say. It was just like, I've really just seen that. I'm still processing it. It hasn't quite sunk in because I know how hard and how long people have tried to do this. And frankly, you just made it look really easy.
So what's fun is your brain, you unless you're unfortunately afflicted with autism, your brain is very good at scanning around the room and going, light, chair, table, and then you're done, right? It just posts that information into a very well learned pigeonhole as a kid. When I do, or myself or one of my team do that, your brain goes, nope, I can't find a hole to put this. I'm receiving the information, but what the hell is this? This should not be real. Now, when you see it on a screen, you just go, yeah, but it's probably fake or CGI or whatever, whether you're consciously thinking that or not. But when you see it live, it's funny, isn't it? Every single person we pretty much do this to.
You make a really good point, actually, because I think they've ruined films. By actually doing things like some of the Marvel stuff now, because the CGI is so good and all the disaster movies and whatever. Now there's kind of a lot of films, there's too much action. You can't process it, and actually you get bored with all the action, whereas years ago it used to be kind of just bits and you kind of be the big build up towards the end or whatever. And I think that's exactly it now. We're used to seeing stuff on screens that isn't real, and now we've just seen something with our own eyes, not looking through the lens of an iPhone. It's incredibly powerful because it just doesn't look real, but you're actually looking at it. It's unbelievable.
So I mean, this is why the conclusion of 3 years of doing this all over the world is we've got this enormous demand around the world for people wanting to see more. Well, what better than bringing 5 or 6 pilots all clad in different kind of sponsored gear, all racing, keep it visceral and exciting with the perception of risk.
Yeah.
I think it would be, I mean, this is what we were due to do in Bermuda in March. We had, you know, a whole bunch of sponsors lined up to go and make this first foray into that kind of hierarchical tree of motor racing in terms of bringing all of that magic. And then COVID obviously paused it all. That I still think is going to be the most amazing live action sport activation that will bring alive that human desire for flight, for breaking free, that also happens to look like a Marvel action film. I mean, I think that will be epic. That's what we're going to do. And honestly, I've said this on stage a number of times. In some small way, if for some reason we haven't spotted, it doesn't work out, we'll do it in a way that's recoverable. We'll crack on with all the military stuff we're doing and all the other social media and whatever. But actually, it is such insane fun doing it. I don't really care if anybody doesn't want to watch. We're going to do it anyway because it is just the most exciting thing.
Does sound like me. Yeah, I want to drive a tank for London. I don't care if no one else wants to say I want to do it.
Exactly.
But I mean, again, that's an interesting point because you're going to be surrounded now by what I'd call positive distraction in the sense that, you could spend the next 20, 30 years just talking to the military about this, commercialising it in other ways, for other industry. I guess just entrepreneurs or kind of lunatics or just wealthy people that just kind of want one because it's cool because you've leapt over so many I guess if take motor racing for instance where it's evolved over the years but gradually over the last 30 40 years there's only sort of so far it can go, but you've just kind of leapt over all of that just with this entirely new concept that it kind of blows everything else out the water.
I mean, you're very kind to say that. We think so, but at the same time, I have the humility to say that motor racing has got a 100-year history where you remember going with your parents to watch it.
And people relate to it because everyone can drive.
When you look at NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, football, baseball, there is such a long tail, authentic kind of history to them all. It's why it's very hard to invent a new sport. But actually, when you break down what makes sport excitement, it is the perception of risk. It's the gladiatorial combat. It's the noise. It's the smell. It's the excitement. It's the drama of it. I think we can deliver all of that. But honestly, I'm all about sort of proving by doing. That's our ethos. We don't sort of just get out there and wave our hands and promise stuff that we can't deliver. We just go and do it and then watch other people follow us. So I'm very confident we can make this into the most amazing sport that'll be both amazing to watch and consume, but also very accessible for people to come and actually do. As you mentioned, we've trained 50 clients already. We've got a whole team of 7 or 8 pilots ourselves. It does not take very long to learn and then can be very safe over water. You just fall 10, 15 feet into water if you get it wrong and really just feel a bit sorry for yourself and a bit damp. You float with all the equipment.
But you can't catch fire when you're in water, which is always a bonus.
That's another bonus. And actually, I don't want to dismiss the heat sort of fire risk thing, but honestly, we've never used a fire extinguisher in 5 years, 4 years or whatever of doing this.
We did have someone standby, to be fair, I didn't want to tell you, but we did have we had a fire blanket we bought from Amazon that was £8.
It's really not that dangerous from that point of view. The danger is going high, but we just don't choose to go high because there's nothing up there.
How high could you go?
As long as your fuel will last. I mean, it gets easier the higher you go from a recirculation point of view. As the air gets thinner, the turbines get less efficient, but the cooler air works better. But it sort of dawned on us, it's funny to say, but there's nothing up there. No one can see you. It just gets very dangerous. The CAA and the FAA will start to get fed up with you going high. And from a military point of view, why do you want to be a target out there? So actually terrain hugging and racing 15, 20 feet over the water, that's where the action is. So, people talk about parachutes and things like that, but actually that's quite dangerous because you have to go to a height where the parachute has time to properly work. And one mistake with that activating and you're not going to have another go. Our ethos is all about recoverable failure. Everything we do from a commercial and safety point of view is all about be able to get back up again. I can admit this because the footage isn't out yet and it won't be out for a while. We were filming with Bear flying out to his island. It's still going to be over his YouTube and ours. On the flight back, I was hammering along at 60 miles an hour, low over the sea to get back home. It was raining, it was so windy, and I misjudged it. There was a 15, 20 mile an hour tailwind, and as I pulled up in front of a sort of 400-foot cliff, now this cliff was at a slope, so I'd calculated that if I fly up the cliff, I got a failure at any moment. It was mostly gorse and stuff, not a fun day out, but it would catch you. Right at the bottom, there was about 15, 20 feet of sloping rock. And I didn't want to go and cut the corner off. I wanted to actually terrain hug. So every moment I'm quite low. So if you got a failure, fall in the water, maybe you fall 5, 10 feet onto the rock, it'd be all right. But I misjudged it. I had such a tailwind as I pulled up to get rid of my horizontal speed. You can do the same in a helicopter.
Yeah.
I hadn't scrubbed enough off. So I hit the cliff at about 10 miles an hour, smacked into the cliff, slid down, was collected by one of the ledges. You know, it's still a very sloping cliff, and I could walk up it afterwards. But you know what? I was fine. I sort of wrecked a bit of the suit. I've got a slightly bruised knee, but I did 12K yesterday with it. Luckily, for the Bear Grylls thing, I don't know why I've admitted all this. Yeah. For the Bear Grylls thing, they'd finished filming by then. So the Bear Grylls thing will look all really cool and slick. And we'll make another episode out of the crash because it looks really spectacular. But I walked all the way up the cliff afterwards. So it's all about recoverable failure.
I'm dyspraxic, so I'm quite clumsy. So I just smash into a wall or something. But I'd be like 30
the
miles
water
an hour.
racing for you will suit you perfectly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, with lots and lots of room all around.
Yes.
And you've got a world record for this, haven't you? Does that still stand? I guess there's no one's going to break this anytime
No, I mean,
soon.
bless the Guinness World Record, folks. We love them dearly. And not long after we launched the company, they approached us and said, look, can we build a world record out of this? Because it just looks so cool. And so they hatched this idea of fastest speed in a human-propelled jet suit or whatever, which is what we do.
Yeah.
So funnily enough,
they made a record just for you.
That's
on
definitely
a
the
Tuesday.
easiest. Yeah, that's the easiest record to break. Yes. So we
you had to be called Richard.
Yeah, exactly. So we set in the glamorous setting of Reading Lake, lovely jet ski lake that we're very grateful to the folks there. We set a not very exciting 32 miles an hour, but it looked amazing. And this was what, I don't know, not very long after we'd launched. And it looked phenomenal. It was the first time I'd ever flown over water. And actually, again, not long after they'd finished filming their piece, I thought, let's see if we can go even quicker. And I pulled too hard around a corner, started to lose altitude, like when you bank in an aircraft.
Yeah,
I hadn't learned that at this stage. And I started sliding downwards, and I just realized, oh, damn it. And so I just slipped into the water and wiped the suit out. But that was back in 2018. We set a new one in autumn 2019 at 85 miles an hour.
Wow.
That was flattening out with a leg wing. Again, not a very glamorous location, but off the pier at Brighton. So yeah, we've got those two world records, obviously one beating the other. But
that must be terrifying to do 85 miles an hour. Was
not
it awesome?
Really. No, it was pretty spectacular. I mean, you vector thrust.
That must feel quick.
Oh, I mean, you're flying. The best analogy, weirdly, is a Harrier aircraft. If people can remember a Harrier or an F-35,
which is still tragic they don't fly, because that's like one of the greatest inventions of all time.
I had the privilege.
They're years behind though.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, I had the privilege of flying at the Farnborough Air Show, which is very cool, and the Spanish had a highly souped up version of one of their Harriers there, and I spoke to the pilot before he did his thing, and he hovered. And I was in quite a long way in the foreground, to be fair, and there's an amazing shot of me hovering with him in the background. But actually, when they're hovering around, they're flying like we do. They are vector thrust flying. They are blowing enough air down to stay in the air.
It's very, very skillful, I think, isn't it? And I think one of the reasons that F-35s and stuff have I think the stuff that you can do in F-35, you can learn in a couple of minutes because there's so much technology working for you.
There's a land
and a Harrier, I think it was really difficult
to do. It's all seat of the pants stuff. But the hardest thing in a Harrier was actually transitioning from that vectored thrust to gradually transitioning fast enough that there's enough airflow, over the wings to be able to actually then fly like a jet fighter and throw that thrust backwards. That's essentially what we were starting to play with doing in Brighton. The rear engine is becoming a propulsive device. And the arm engines are really keeping you a little bit in the air, but you're now flying with that leg wing and propelling yourself. And that, that acceleration just feels phenomenal. It just feels absolutely out of this world. You just feel...
And I guess sort of transitioning back again, it must be a real skill. Because again, I guess you can't learn that tethered, so you have to just kind of do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say by then you've got enough natural balance and stability to be able to kind of feel it enough to be able to square it away. But it is quite a tricky thing to kind of. Yeah, it is. Ironically, it's actually transitioning back out into the hover again. That's the hardest thing.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah. No, I'd say that's one of the most tricky things.
But so going back to the BP thing, I mean, when you sort of basically said to your wife, "Look, I want to sort of leave my job and basically do this full time," did she shout a lot?
Well, I mean, what I managed to do because of that, childhood background of seeing my father go through an entrepreneurial journey that ultimately had the kind of worst outcome you can imagine.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily a positive journey for a lot of people.
No, and I mean that's where my narrative of recoverable failure comes from. That
protecting the downside as well, basically.
Yeah, very much. And when I did all this, I got this suit to fly while I was still working at BP. I did it all in weekends and evenings.
Yeah.
And the trajectory that saw me ultimately leave the company was was very much one of me trying to sort of manage the downside. And in the end, I even managed to engineer a career break with BP. I even did the TED Talk on the launch when I was still working at BP. I said, at the time I'd transitioned out of trading and I'd got a job in the sort of more innovation side of things. You know, and I was very open with them and said, look, you know, I've done this thing in my evenings and weekends and I'm going to launch it and let's see what happens. And then I told them that I'd got this invitation to do, you know, TED 2017, which is a pretty amazing, you know, opportunity.
Of course,
and they said, look, go for it. And they could see that I was on this pretty awesome journey and let me just disappear off for 2 years on an unpaid career break, which in my mind was really valuable because it gave me that sort of fallback.
Yeah. Some time to analyze it and
you know, and I felt like
you've got that safety net of going back. Very
much. What I didn't want to have happen is have the fragments of an idea, and then go and just strike out for right at the beginning of the journey and take on that huge amount of risk where I had no idea. I mean, I didn't even know if I could get this to work. I mean, it genuinely was a complete flight of fantasy without being too corny. I didn't know that this concept had any legs at all. So to give up everything at that stage, the pressure that would have ladled on me and all the learned sort of, I suppose, lessons I'd had of growing up around watching my father's business kind of do well and then gradually not do well and all of that family stuff just fall apart.
Yeah.
I couldn't stomach the idea of putting my family through the same kind of turmoil of watching everything kind of just decline and fall apart. So 16 years of working hard, putting money away, and then managing the trajectory in a way that minimized the risk is something I've carried forward even now.
Yeah.
So it was pretty, close to my heart to try and keep it.
I love how humble you are, because this is like, for me, this is like up there with the Wright brothers, in a way, in terms of, what you've achieved and what you've done, where, millions of people have tried this. It's incredible, really, that you're just so down to earth about it, literally.
I think that's important because, not only in terms of building the business around it, but also, you have to keep humble and not get ahead of yourself with the risk of this as well. That if you got fully yourself and decided that you'd squared away all the risk and you go up to 500 feet and hammer around at 100 miles an hour, failure for you will mean you're not going to get another go to play with it. So a bit like, I think if you talk to professional motor racing drivers, they're most of them are pretty humble under the surface because they know what they're doing is difficult and can go wrong quite quickly, and they have to just keep their eye on safety all the time. So I think that's probably part of why myself and the team are all quite grounded, I think, in what we do.
Yeah, because I love the humility, because we work a lot with the military, and again, we work with some special forces, but again, because of some of the stuff that they do, they actually can't think about what they do really as dangerous, because it is sort of so dangerous. A lot of them actually, I know, tend to feel sort of fairly invincible, just because they have to be really confident and confident ability. And if they do start thinking about the fact they're not going to come home, they probably don't. Yeah. And again, they've got, wives and kids and stuff as well. So, it's, you must sort of feel fairly mortal, in terms of what you're doing. Because things can go wrong, and especially with aviation and new technology and stuff as well.
But I think a little bit like the military, I mean, there is definitely space for the exuberant immortality of just feeling like, you're on top of the world. But actually, in my experience, most of the time, the military they fall back on teamwork and discipline and rigor and process, and that is what you have to have at the forefront of your mind when you're in a situation that is getting difficult. You have to just fall back on that and believe in what you're doing and accept that there's a percentage risk of you having an incident or catching a bullet or whatever. But actually, if you're a professional and you have trained and prepared, that's the best you can do, and you get on with it. So there is quite a sort of military. We've got a lot of military folks in our wider team, and I a bit like military test pilots. Test piloting the early forms of the Harrier, for instance. It was a dangerous job, but again, if you're rigorous about what you're doing, you can do quite a lot to minimize the risk, and then after that, you just get on with it and be professional about it. It's similar kind of ethos, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you were talking as well. I mean, I've got lots of questions, but where do you see this going? What would be your dream? What would you see? Because we talked a lot about, sort of selling, but without selling out, and the branding elements are important, and there are so many ways you can go with this. What would be your sort of preferred outcome here? Do you want to see this become affordable so that anyone could do it? Or I know you don't want thousands of people flying around in jetpacks everywhere, slamming into buildings and upsetting aircraft, because you can see that easily happening. But, where would you love to see this go if you could kind of wave a magic wand?
I mean, I think, first of all, that cover off the sort of mass transit, revolutionize human mobility thing. I mean, that's not us. I mean, I often say that, the first motor cars were considered noisy, smelly and inefficient, and look where they've got to. But actually, I think we're going to have to wait quite a long time until maybe the electric version of what we've done, and we have built an electric version, until that gets to the point where, that can be fulfilling a niche part of how humans move around. But I think to answer your question, our focus is the race series. I think we can bring an amazing, visceral, new era of human kind of competitive, I suppose sport, if you like, where you see the best of technology and the best of human beings, guys and girls from different sporting backgrounds, competing in something that looks amazing and terrifying and shocking and like a CGI film, and yet actually keep it very safe. It's very portable because you can move it to any water body around the world, lake, rivers and seafronts. Every city in the world has one of those.
I was amazed this was in the back of your car when you turned up. I thought you were going to have just an entire lorry full of gear and technical stuff turn. I was amazed you just kind of got in your car. It was literally flying in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, two suitcases. Well, you can pack all the gear into 2 suitcases and go anywhere in the world on it, usually. I mean, COVID makes that more tricky now, but...
Sure.
So yeah, it doesn't need to be expensive and difficult to go and do. That's our real focus. And then off the back of that, train members of the public who want to come and learn to fly either in the race series or just for a fun day out to experience something that, like you said, appeals to that inner childlike dream of flight. Every single person that's ever strapped in one of these suits has kind of lost their mind with what it feels like to just lift off the ground and be free. And then you've even got the electric tethered version. That's quite easy to do. We built one of those already. So,
do you know, I nearly asked you about an electric version, but I thought that's a stupid question.
Electric batteries, without a tether is really hard.
Okay.
But with a tether that keeps you safe, that also has the power running down it, that's very doable. So we're working with a bunch of people to see if we can actually make that an even more accessible way of experiencing it. That would be really cool.
And this is kind of getting lighter and all the time, I guess, in terms of technology. And again, and the duration, I guess, is increasing. Because what's your maximum flight time now doable?
I mean, it depends, 5, 6, 7 minutes or so.
Okay.
But most of our events are 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it really depends. You can just keep ladling the power on to carry more fuel, but nearly all the military and search and rescue and, and event stuff, needs to only be a couple of minutes usually, because you can accelerate so quickly. You can achieve quite high speeds very quickly. And you can be so nimble, and you're obviously flying like the crow flies, as it were. So you really can get a long way in a couple of minutes.
And obviously you were a Royal Marine reservist, so you must be incredibly fit and healthy and flexible and whatever used to be. But how important's that? Because you mentioned before about the training that you were doing, and actually that gave you the idea potentially for this and how you'd power the suit. So how important is having that flexibility, and do you keep that up, and what's your routine look like in terms of training?
I used to try and keep the calisthenics up, but that's kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit. I find just flying a lot and carrying it around and all that kind of stuff and testing a lot of the wing systems is a pretty good workout. Mostly running, because I all the events around the world, I used to pack my trainers and go running in all of those 31 countries we've flown in, which has been an amazing privilege.
Yeah, I read some of that. You're an ultra marathon runner.
I used to do ultra marathons.
Is there anything you can't do? Because I'm feeling really,
many things.
Insignificant.
I can't play any instruments. I'm useless at languages. I'm pretty dyslexic. Yeah, there's a long list. I just don't spend time on those things, unfortunately. Ultra marathons I really, really love. I love the challenge of just putting the trainers on and keeping going for a few hours. I've done some pretty long ones before. That helps me keep light and eat any kind of rubbish I want, which is quite nice. And keeping light means you can run the engines less, you can carry more fuel and all that kind of stuff. So, but that's it really now.
So put it this way, we're not going to get James off the ground anytime soon, basically.
It's just a bigger suit. In fact, we had the guy, who was the guy, former world record, or maybe his current world record strongman, who played that big character in the Game of Thrones. I should know his name.
Oh,
yes, him. Whatever his name is. Amazing guy.
Bjorn.
Yeah, he reached out and said, can we build a suit for him at one point? And we can. It's just you scale up everything. I'd still like to take him up on that at some point. But it's just scaling all the engines up.
Yeah, he's a big lad. Good luck getting him off the ground, definitely.
That would be noisy.
What's your biggest fear?
Yes.
It hasn't got to be sort of flying, but what would be... I think I might know this. Would it be to kind of end up in the trap you talked about earlier?
Yeah, it's probably ever get tempted to throw so much at something that then fails, and then drags me, my family, my kind of lifestyle. If you see down in the direction that would start to feel terribly familiar to what I felt like as a kid. We pretty much lost everything as a kid, and I just couldn't forgive myself if I went down that same route. I think maybe a little bit like you. I think I'm aware that I experience the highs of achievement, maybe a few percent higher than is normal. And then similarly, when something doesn't go well, I try and get satisfied that I've got a portfolio of things going on. So I'll just feel more happy about whatever else, family or running or whatever. But I'm aware that I take setbacks a little bit harder than I should do. And therefore you don't want to get on that downward spiral of feeling like it's all getting irrationally negative. And I think this is a common thing with people who want to go.
It's really common, I always say the higher the high, the lower the low.
Yeah, I think bipolarism is a strong thing. I don't think I'm bipolar, but I resonate with descriptions of it.
Yeah. I think I think everyone probably is to a certain extent. I think if you want to achieve amazing things and you do start to do those, exactly, the problem is then just normality of life afterwards can sort of feel a bit shit.
Yeah.
And that's why I think humility is important, because you learn to embrace just going for a walk on a winter's day and going to have a coffee somewhere. You embrace the normal things, because otherwise, if you don't, you're just going to keep on looking for something that's not there.
Pre-COVID, I get off the plane with the team from doing some big event in LA or whatever, and then going for a rainy run with my dog or my boys on their bikes or whatever would be just absolute heaven, because there'd be nobody there, and it would just be grungy and muddy, and there wouldn't be the buzz of LA. And I've literally been to events where, and this sounds ridiculous, I've had a 10-minute conversation with Elon Musk, walked over, got another drink, and then had a 10-minute chat with Jeff Bezos in the same event. And that never happens, right? I was told that never happened, and I've done that.
Yeah.
And you're just thinking, this is just insane, right? And then I'm back on the plane, back home, and think, you know what? I'm actually happier going and running.
So So what did Elon say, and what did Jeff say? Was it?
They're great. I mean, I love, I love just sharing what we do with those kind of people, because in a tiny way, we're doing something unusual that hasn't been done before. And I mean, Christ, Elon going to pretty much trying to get to Mars and all that sort of stuff. And Jeff, reimagining the world's, shopping process. I mean, how do you compete with that? But in a small way, it's just hugely gratifying to see them look at what we've done and go, hey, that's really cool in your sphere. And then I walk away. I don't ask of anything of these people.
Yeah.
That for me is just a huge kind of bucket list thing. Same with Zuckerberg. I flew at one of his events. And it's great seeing, his reaction to what we do.
These are some of the world's kind of just foremost visionaries.
Yeah.
And, arguably some of the world's most successful people. Again, looking at this and going, wow, and these are hard people to impress, because, like I said, they're going to Mars. And
that's enough for me.
It's pretty incredible.
I certainly haven't got any, desire to try and sort of pull out some business plan and try, I love the fact we don't need to do that. We took a VC round by mistake on the way to do the TED Talk. There's the Drapers, Adam and Tim Draper wrote a $640,000 deal on a banknote in a car park or parking lot in San Francisco at the very first event we ever did. And a week later, I was flying in front of Branson and that lot. It's TED 2017. We've not raised any money since that accidental raise. And I wasn't even there to do a raise. I was there just to show them and test it before I flew at TED.
This could so easily get ruined. And I quite like the fact that you've sort of got this direction that you want to go in, which, I completely agree with, to be honest. And this could so easily get ruined if you get the wrong people around that just don't want this, they just want to monetize it, basically. Because that's kind of missed the point in terms of just, I know making money is important, but this could easily get ruined from a brand perspective and whatever, and you could end up sort of having so little say.
Yeah, no, I
it's kind of your dream, really.
Yeah, I want to keep the sort of authenticity of the dream. We have people like the following. I mean, there's a guy, wonderful chap, I won't name him, but he's the former chief test pilot for the F-35 program from Edwards Air Force Base. A glittering career, U.S. Air Force test pilot, and he literally takes his own leave to come and hang out with us when we were in LA, because for him, seeing what we do, what you saw this morning, more encapsulates his childhood dream of why he became an F-35 pilot than, frankly, what his day job was. He's not a test pilot anymore now. It's so humbling to have somebody like that. Literally, I turn around and watch him cleaning coffee stains off the private jet hangar floor of where we've been training pilots. Like, you can't be doing that. You should not be doing that. Get one of my team to do that. But it's like, no, honestly, it's a pleasure. He likes hanging out with us. Because it's back to raw basics. It's back to that pure raw dream of human flight, and everybody's there because of the passion of the journey, not because it's some big corporate machine.
I get from you as well, we've been chatting sort of all day, but I get the impression normally the dream of something is probably better than the reality. But I think maybe now your reality is actually better than the dream.
A little bit, but again, a bit like, I'll turn around a bit like you, just when you've achieved something, we're afflicted by this terrible problem of once you've achieved something, you're looking over the next downhill. So the whole mindfulness thing is a real challenge. The whole difficult. Just accept what you've got, feel happy, and stop looking over the next horizon. But if you didn't think like that, you wouldn't be here in the first place.
No.
But slowly turning that off is pretty much impossible. I try to slow down with that stuff, but I was just telling you about it now. I'm back literally tomorrow. If I wasn't here now, COVID has been actually a blessing in disguise in a way from a R&D point of view, and I feel terribly sorry for this, the impact on everybody, and it has had an impact on our business, but actually it's given us more R&D time. I am so excited about what we're building with the team back in the lab.
There's a lot of companies out there that are going to have a smaller business, but a better business, are refocused about what really matters, because everyone's really been on the rat race, and again, are going to get back into the rat race. And to a certain extent, in some respects, we do need to, because this is going to be really damaging with the economy as well, more so than it already has been. But operationally, you've been able to do the stuff that you haven't been able to do, and it's actually given everyone thinking time. I've kind of quite enjoyed just... It for me, Grenade feeling like a startup again, because I remember sitting there late March thinking, wow, we did not see this coming, and all those locations that we had all of a sudden just weren't there, and we thought we're in 80 countries, so we're going to be fairly resistant to something happening in the world, but of course it was kind of it's hit every country, so no one saw that coming. But I completely agree. It's given really sort of positive reflection time, and again, adaptation is just the key to survival, isn't it? And it's made everyone sort of really think about adapting the business as well.
It's often cited that, if you look at the technology going into the First or Second World War versus what the world had at the end of the war, look at that. I mean, we went into the First World War with canvas and timber aeroplanes that would chug along at 80 miles an hour and came out with a jet engine and radio and microwaves and all this stuff. You'd never wish a war on the world, but we're experiencing a mini version of the same thing. And this will shake up the snow globe and give us with a whole load of new things that otherwise would have taken another 10, 15 years.
It's definitely forces innovation, which we definitely need. We're out of time, but honestly, I could talk to you for hours about this. This has been absolutely fascinating. Really has been fascinating. Honestly, it's just great that you're such a down-to-earth, humble guy as well.
Likewise. That was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thoroughly enjoyable. Thanks, Richard. So you've been listening to me, Alan Barratt, with the Grenade podcast, Pull the Pin, and that was a fantastic interview, I think, really interesting with Richard Browning. So if you like what you've heard, then make sure you subscribe. We are on all the major platforms.